Welcome to Days of Roar, a Detroit Free Press podcast. My name is Mark Gorosh. I'm a public baseball analyst. I'm here with Free Press beat writer Evan Petzold. Evan, how you doing down there in Florida? You've been down there a long time, man.
Yeah, I have been down here for a while, Mark. It's good to be back for week 2 of the podcast. It's normally a good thing when you make it to week 2, correct? Hopefully we can make it to week 52 at some point. But to make it to week 2, that's a good sign, right?
Week 2 is a good sign, a very, very good sign. I've almost always made it to week 2 and everything. Week 3, a little less success, but week 2, I've made it almost every time I've embarked on something. So it's been very warm down there this week. You look very tan. There's been a lot of Tiger home runs, a lot of Tiger wins, and actually a lot of interesting Tiger things this week. So why don't you, let's jump into it. And we got a lot of things to talk about. Wanted right off the jump, I think something that has been giving a lot of Tiger fans unnecessary angst, which has been Spencer Torkelson. And let's jump in a little bit. You wrote a really good article about Spencer, about the mental side of his preparation. And I think all week he's done nothing but hit 1 or 2 scuds every game. A lot of them are getting caught, but why don't you elaborate a little bit on what you're seeing from him in the batter's box, and then we can talk a little bit about his preparation.
Not only just the last week or so, it's almost been all of spring training, really coming out of, live BPs and getting into games. The first pitch that he saw, or his first at-bat, I should say, drilled it to the deepest part of center field. It went 415 feet, and it was an out at the back of Joker Marchant Stadium there in the deepest part of center field. And it was like, oh, wow, that was impressive to see him hit the ball that hard. And he has just continued to hit the ball that hard over and over and over and over. It's become kind of like a thing where this guy's just not getting rewarded for hard hit balls. And, when you go through that, it's the question is, how do you manage that? How do you deal with that, right? We saw him in the past. We've seen him drop F-bombs before after strikeouts. We've seen him hanging his head. We've seen a very frustrated version of Spencer Torkelson, speaking to last season. And it was interesting talking to him with a mental performance coach that he hired in the offseason. He talked about just kind of really understanding his process as opposed to the results. And I thought that just through that, it's a good example of, hey, let's not just look at the numbers. And we're going to talk about this a lot, this podcast, because I think it's going to come up with guys like Parker Meadows and Andre Lipschitz, who we're going to get to later. But the process and the experience and is way more important than what the numbers are saying. And I have some examples of that too. But Torkelson's batting .200 with no home runs. But Mark, that doesn't tell the full story. Well,
I think mature hitters understand that every time they go up there, they try to be consistent and repeat their process. If they hit the ball hard, in the major leagues, people are going to catch the baseball. But over the course of, 25 to 38 bats a week after week, your batting average balls in play, which those numbers start normalizing and the fielders stop getting in the way all the time. As long as you hit the ball hard, you're usually going to get some pretty good results over a larger sample size. So if you are mature enough to accept that and have patience and stick to the plan, usually your results follow. So I think that's hopefully what Torkelson has learned, how to remind himself that all he can do is hit the ball hard. The results will follow.
That's where he's at right now. And that's why, he went and hired the mental performance coach, and they talk every week and he takes notes. And it's just about understanding his process, what he's all about, and kind of sticking to that and not allowing, what the numbers say on the scoreboard, affect what he's doing day in and day out. And I think that's going to be really big for him. And some numbers that jumped out to me just a couple of days ago, I was looking and this guy's got a 252 Wobicon, which is essentially his production on balls in play. That's weighted on base average on contact. And then also there's an expected, which is an X Wobicon. And that's basically contact quality. And his Wobicon is 252. His X Wobicon is 700. And that's a huge difference, right? That's an example of a guy who's not getting rewarded for what he's doing. His contact quality has been among the elite of the elite so far this spring. And he's also got an 84.2% contact rate. And that was based on numbers I was looking at from a couple of days ago. So that tells you he's hitting the ball a ton and his contact quality is great. And that's everything that you want from him right now. Like, that's exactly where you want him to be. And the results, if he continues that, I mean, that is, we're talking like an MVP caliber season. But if he's able to maintain that to an extent, the back of the baseball card results, what you see on the scoreboard every day is going to change. It's so early. It's been a few games. The sample size is so small. And I guess you could say that for the numbers that I just provided. But I do think the numbers that I provided there are more of an example of the process as opposed to the results. And that's what matters. And that's what he's focused on.
So let me break that down in English real fast. Here's a simple explanation of what you're saying, Ev. He's hitting the ball hard. His results on contact are a 252 batting average when he's hitting the ball.
Yeah.
But when he's putting the ball in play, the expected batting average of the type of ball he's putting in play is over 700. So the results are 252. The expected results, if he were to do that over a large sample size, would be 700. So he is hitting the ball very hard, very well. I'll give you a specific example. One day he made 2 outs. One went 400 feet. The other one went 380 feet. The expected batting average on one ball was 920. The expected batting average on the other ball was 980. They were both outs. So, you can't do much better than that. The exit velocity, I think, on one was 105.9. The other one was over 110. All good things from Spencer Torkelson, really hitting the ball well. The other thing that has been a big concern that those of us in the baseball community that pay attention to a lot of the numerical minutia, Torkelson really struggled against velocity, especially velocity in the middle of the plate.
Not a problem this spring.
In fact, Johan Duran from Minnesota, who throws well over 100, probably if not the hardest thrower in the American League, the second hardest thrower. Torkelson faced him, and he lined a single to right on a pitch that was 100.7 miles an hour right down the middle. So all good things we're seeing from Spencer Torkelson, and he's invested time into trying to take a more mature approach. He's done other things mechanically that are subtle but proving to be very effective. Smaller bat, a few tweaks with his hand, a little bit of a toe tap, all things that are getting him to the front of the plate on time. And we like to say something in baseball. He's beating the pitcher to the spot at the front of the plate. And
that's huge.
He did that very little last year. He's done it a shocking amount already this spring, and everybody should be pretty encouraged. Let's see what this week brings. It would be nice to not have to worry about Spencer Torkelson as a productive hitter in the middle of the Detroit lineup.
Yeah, definitely no concerns about Torkelson so far. But again, it's so early that we're going to have to see how this plays out over a longer stretch and if he can maintain it, especially into the regular season when he's facing really good pitching all the time. It's not that he hasn't done it against good pitching in spring training. It's just that, the volume of good pitchers that you face is going to be much higher once we get into the season. But it's going to be interesting too. Another guy to look at that was going to play a little bit of first base is Tyler Nevin. And he goes down with an oblique strain this week. And that's a concern. That's a concern for Tyler, considering the fact that he was getting a lot of reps at third base. He was getting a lot of reps at first base. He can play both corner outfield positions. The Tigers brought in a couple guys that could play first as well as third, namely Nevin and Andy Ibanez. And that oblique strain, I mean, those are really tricky injuries. Everyone is a little bit different. There was a study from a former Dodgers staffer who did a deep dive onto grade 1 strains, which is basically what Nevin has. And the average player came back in some 27 days. And so that's kind of like a rough ball idea of how long it might take for him to get back. So it almost seems like he's probably going to miss a chance to make the opening day roster. I don't want to say that for certain because, again, you never know. But that's something to monitor for sure, because you don't have him. You're going to have to look elsewhere to fill that spot at third base. We talked about it last week on the pod. You have Nick Maton playing against right-handed hitters. You're going to need someone to play against lefties. Nevin was in that mix. Maybe not anymore.
More likely than not, starts the season on the DL, then probably gets a 20-day rehab assignment to Toledo. Probably don't see him till close to May 1st, if at all. But Andre Lipsius has gotten off to a pretty spectacular start. I think they're potentially a little concerned. I don't know if concerned's a fair word. I think they want to see how reliable he can be defensively. He can play third. He can play second. They've been working him out at first. He's been a little rough at first, but I would say he's the front runner right now until your buddy Andy Ibanez comes back from the WBC. And I think with such a short window of opportunity, it's going to be pretty tough unless Andy's really, really good in a short period of time for him to unseat Lipsius. It's probably his job to lose right now.
Well, I think we can get into that in a little bit, but I know too, you can talk about Ibanez. He hasn't played in the WBC because of a sprained finger that he had during an exhibition game. And he took BP in Taiwan recently. Team Cuba, who he plays for, moved on to the next round. So it seems like he could return to the lineup. We'll see if he does or not, but it's not a serious injury. So he's going to be able to come back and compete for that job. Matt Vierling had a knee strain and he missed some time, but he feels like he's fine. He's healthy. He should be back in games relatively soon.
I picked up from him discussing his knee. He must have had some swelling in his knee, and they had to wait for it to go down before they could start having him at least work out a little bit. Is that accurate or no?
Yeah, it sounded like just some inflammation that he was waiting on for it to go down. He took batting practice on Sunday, and he basically said too, like, it was really precautionary. There wasn't really a whole lot of pain. It was just some tightness in the knee. And it was like, okay, let's just shut this thing down for a second. Let's make sure that I'm all good. And he's fine. He just didn't want to risk an injury later on, right? If you continue to play through it during spring training games, you never know what could happen. But it was back when the Tigers played the Phillies on the road. He was running off the field and kind of felt it in his knee a little bit and thought he was going to be all right, but then just decided to shut it down for a minute. And so he'll be back. No worries at all about him.
They have a couple of split squad games, I think Monday and Tuesday, right?
Yep.
Wouldn't be shocked if he DH'd in one of those games before he played the field. Might be a good way to get him back in pretty quick and get a chance to give a bunch of people some at-bats the next 2 days. You got 4 games in 2 days. So while we're talking about injured players, I'm curious if you've had a chance to talk to Tarek Skubal at all about his rehab process, or is that something we can maybe send you to do a little reconnaissance on this week and get back? He should be getting to the point where, I don't know if he's ready to throw a bullpen, but he might be ready to throw off the mound soon here.
He's definitely working his way up. He hasn't put a timeline on anything. He hasn't put a timeline on when he's going to throw a bullpen. Like, that has all been, kind of between him and the Tigers. He hasn't really wanted to talk about when he expects to be back or what that looks like. But he's playing catch 5 times a week, working through his throwing progression. Not a ton of newsworthy notes there. It's just kind of wait and see until he takes that next step. And when he does, I'm sure we'll know about it and we'll definitely be able to discuss it. And by the way, too, with Vierling, he's not on the travel roster for either a Monday split squad. So I wouldn't expect to see him in a game.
Okay. He's not on the travel roster.
Nope.
Also, Reese Olson, saw that he had shingles. Good to go now. Probably going to see him this week. I'm sure they'll work an inning in for him this week somewhere.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to get him into a game at some point for sure. But he was one of the guys that was sent down and sent back to minor league camp. There's been a handful of cuts so far. Elvis Alvarado, Adam Wolf, Dylan Dingler, Julio E. Rodriguez, by the way, not the Julio Rodriguez. Justin Henry Malloy, Colt Keith, obviously Olson, Wenzel Perez, Angel De Jesus, Brennan Hannafy, and Mario Feliciano. We have 54 players left in camp now, so we're going to see how all that shakes out. Only got a couple weeks left.
You're going to see a bunch of cuts here in the next few days too, I would think. So I found Feliciano to be pretty interesting. A lot of people think they signed him as a catcher, and I don't think he caught an inning. He did play first base, and he also seemed to hit the ball on a line somewhere in the playing field almost every time he had an at-bat in the last 2 weeks. I wouldn't be shocked if they turned him into a first baseman in Toledo this year, and he has a very good bat. He was a pretty good prospect for the Brewers. His defense was kind of rough at catcher. He might be able to catch a little bit, but I really think that he's probably going to play first base this year. In addition to that, they sent Colt Keith out. He, I'm sure, is not too happy about that and probably wishes he could have had a few more major league at-bats, but I'll be interested to see who they send out this week. They got a lot of catchers. They got some arms. We can discuss the pitching staff here soon, but I would assume a guy like Matt Whistler is needing to have a good outing next time, or he could be part of the cuts.
I'd agree. But also, too, Colt Keith has been coming back. Justin Henry Malloy has been coming back. Hopefully, Wenzel Perez is going to be able to get into some games, too, after coming back from a back injury. So we're still going to see some of these guys. Elvis Alvarado is going to come back at some point, I believe. Dylan Dingler could probably get some reps once that catcher room thins out a little bit. So we definitely haven't seen the last of Colt Keith or Jay Hen, Justin Henry Malloy in big league camp. They'll come over and get some at-bats and get some reps.
Okay. But I would say, though, with 54 people in camp, that there's going to be another 10 to 15 guys that are getting sent out this week because the season starts in 2 weeks and they need to get the roster down to a manageable amount of human beings. So just not going to be enough at-bats or innings for everybody. I would imagine some more people are going to go out here pretty quickly, maybe by Wednesday or even sooner. So
yeah, that takes us right into the bullpen, though, right? Because it's some of those arms that you're going to have to start making decisions on, and obviously all of that is directly tied to the starting rotation, where there is some concern about Matt Manning, and we can talk about that now. We can talk about that later, but the rotation seems pretty set outside of one guy, and I think the bullpen is probably the bigger story right here, just because there are so many different names.
Let's discuss the starting rotation. We'll get into the relievers. There's a lot to discuss about the relievers. It's probably a revolving door. It'll be a long discussion, but starting rotation's a little more finite. Matthew Boyd through Sunday continues to look like Sandy Koufax. I think he struck out 17 guys in his last, 9 or 10 innings, really mixing his pitches, really sharp, almost dominating. You saw him. Give us a little insight on what you saw.
Yeah, he just looks really good. I mean, everything's pretty synced up. He talked a little bit about his delivery being out of whack, but I think that was more of just him nitpicking more than anything. He's looked super sharp. The sliders looked really good. Everything's coming together. Like I like what I've seen so far. The strikeouts are off the charts. It's kind of typical Matt Boyd, right? A guy who comes out of the gate pretty hot every single season. That's what we've all grown accustomed to in Detroit, watching him pitch and picking up where he left off in that sense, at least. So I like what I've seen out of him. I mean, he looks good. He looks really good. There's really no other way to put it. Everything's pitches are moving. He's doing a really good job of mixing his pitches, and seems like he's willing to throw everything. I really liked in at-bats against Willie Castro. He had 2 of them actually against Willie, former Tiger utility player. He threw in a first pitch curveball, dropped it right in there for a strike, and then he goes to a fastball away, gets Willie to chase, and then he just throws that slider. It was so nasty in the dirt and got him to swing and miss. And then the next at-bat, he throws another curveball in there and throws it for a strike, and Willie can't hit it, and then ends up striking him out again. And it's all good things from Matt Boyd so far. I love the way he's mixing his pitches. I love the way he's using that curveball, and the slider is sharp. He wants to be a 4-pitch pitcher, and he sure looks like it right now.
I mean, the fact that Willie Castro is chasing pitches in the dirt, I got to just be astonished by that.
Does that surprise you, Mark?
I can't believe it. What I really like.
He did draw a walk.
What I really liked about Willie's day today is the Tigers made sure that he did get to walk and he hit a homer, because I think they, in a stealth way, want him to make the Twins roster. Might be a good idea to see if they can get Willie to make the Twins roster, because it probably be much more productive facing him than it was his 1,000 at-bats the last 3 seasons playing for him. So my feeling about Matthew Boyd, happy to see him do well. Know he's going to eat innings. Anybody that knows me knows I'm not a huge Matthew Boyd fan. I think Matthew Boyd is what he is. And there's 6 months in a season. He's going to be outstanding for 2 of those months. He's going to be mediocre for another month. And the other 3 months, you're going to be kind of frustrated. He's had some very, very underrated seasons. He's been over 4 WAR before. He's gotten off to great starts. He's been a borderline all-star. It just all ends up in the same place. It ends up, with an ERA somewhere between 450 and 550, 30-plus homers. It eventually deteriorates. I'm hoping one of these seasons that doesn't happen, but until it doesn't happen, that's kind of how I see it. He's going to take the ball every 5th day, and he hopefully will eventually have more good than bad one year. But in the 7 years he's been here, it's been rare when over the course of a season, he's been able to maintain the high caliber months for more than 60 days. So I promised you I'd be unvarnished about this stuff, and that's just kind of how I feel about it. Glad he's doing well, though. I want to talk about Michael Lorenzen for a second. He's thrown a couple times, came over from the Angels. It's a pretty checkered injury history, but has pretty damn good stuff. Really developed an excellent changeup he went to a lot last year and has shown, at least in the first two outings, not quite sharp with command yet, but a lot of swing and miss, a lot of good stuff, kind of interesting.
That's the X factor for him is can he throw strikes? Can he fill up the zone? That's kind of always been, the thorn in his side is not being able to get inside the strike zone and limit those walks. And that's going to be the biggest question for him all the way through. We know his stuff is good. He understands what he's trying to do as a starting pitcher now after coming back from an injury last season when he was out with the Los Angeles Angels. He dominated in September. He mixed his pitches well. He knows exactly what he's trying to do against both righties and lefties. But now it just comes down to can you throw strikes and can you throw enough strikes? And that's kind of the biggest question. There really isn't much, in my opinion, to discuss about him other than he knows what he needs to do. He has really good stuff. But can he throw strikes? Can he be inside the zone? Because if he's going to be walking, 3-4 batters every game, that's going to be a problem. That's literally the complete opposite of what President of Baseball Operations Scott Harris wants, and when he talks about dominating the strike zone, that's not dominating the strike zone.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what Chris Fetter does with that. Chris has historically been pretty good about making small tweaks and helping the sequencing of pitchers that start limiting their walk rate, and they can help Lorenzen. I think he can be quietly a pretty effective starting pitcher for the Tigers, which leads me into somebody that has some similarities to Lorenzen and really looked interesting this week. Second start for Spencer Turnbull off of TJ. His first innings of these last two starts have been, almost leaving both you and I with our mouth agape. They were so good, the first innings of both starts. Better in the second inning this time. Slider is, I texted you after he threw a couple sliders, and you texted me back that you had seen him warm up in the bullpen, and he had a few words for his catcher after he threw the first few, and that slider was just something the other day. Really looks good. Needs to build up. Got an endurance question. Need to get him up to being effective for 60 or 70 pitches. He seems to tire pretty quickly. After 30, 35 pitches, he's kind of gassed. But share with me a little bit when you saw him discuss with his catcher how good his slider was and what you're seeing from Spencer Turnbull.
Yeah, he was throwing him to Eric Haas in the bullpen. And I was just standing out there, again, enjoying the Florida sun that I get to bask in on a daily basis. And just watching him throw that pitch, and he was ripping them and kind of got to a point where he said, oh, yeah, that feels good. That feels good. So it was beginning to end of his second start. It was, from the bullpen, the time that he walked off the mound, that the slider felt pretty good. He did struggle with it a little bit towards the end, only because, again, it's a volume thing with him. He's going to have to get built up, but that's so normal coming back from Tommy John surgery. I think it's really encouraging that his stuff looks off the charts. His fastball is, sitting 94, 95. He wants to see more 96, 97 out of that pitch. He thinks he can get it there, and he thinks that's the way that that's the trajectory that it's going. I mean, this is two starts, two real games since being back, and he looks dynamite. He looks like he could be the best pitcher in that rotation. Just the stuff is so good. And I think, too, he did answer some command issues, going back to, the season that he got injured in 2021. I mean, the walks per nine down to 2.2. The year before that, 4.6. The year before that in 2019, 3.6. So he's answered some of the questions about the walks, which is why I don't think he profiles exactly like Lorenzen, but I do, hear what you're saying in the sense of when these guys are in the zone, they can be really good. I think Turnbull is further ahead in the throwing strikes category. He's shown that he can do it coming back. He's completely filthy. He is completely filthy. I think it's just all about building that pitch count now, getting him up to a point where he's going to be able to, get to 60, 70 and just build it up. He threw 45 pitches in his last start. So as long as that continues to build and the stuff stays the same, you're looking at a potential number one. And I'm not talking about number one as in, Cy Young type, number one, but I'm talking about number one in this rotation. It's been impressive so far. I love what I'm seeing.
Well, it's exciting. His stuff has never been the issue. His durability has always been the issue. And I'll be excited to see if he can stay healthy. And I got to tell you, the stuff is just electric. I want to, let's talk about Erod for a second. He threw a couple times. He's been very, very, very good. Very workmanlike would be the way I would describe it. Seemed in a groove. He's going to throw here in the WBC. He's at the top of the rotation. So you have Erod, Boyd, Turnbull, Lorenzen, but Eduardo is a proven quantity think we've discussed this before. He's had years where he's won as many as 19 games. He's thrown over 200 innings before. And he looked pretty damn sharp the 3 times he's thrown down here in Lakeland. And I'll be excited to see when he comes back if he can continue on having one of those seasons where he's reliable and effective almost every time out. He's had many years that he's had seasons like that, and it's important that they can rely on him every 5 days.
Yeah, keep an eye on him on Tuesday. He's going to be pitching in the WBC for Team Venezuela against Nicaragua. So it'll be good to watch him in that type of an atmosphere. It'll be interesting how he comes back from that too, knowing that it's just going to be a different atmosphere, pitching down in Miami in the WBC. It's his first time doing that. I'm really excited to see what that, high pressure environment is going to be like for him. If you've watched any of the WBC, which Mark, I know you have, that atmosphere is just electric. And, the Tigers got a couple guys there. But for Erod, he's been working quick. He's been working fast. He's been really efficient. Everything looks pretty sharp. Another guy who, to me, kind of looks like Matt Boyd in the sense of everything is where it needs to be and then some right now. But because the WBC came in pretty well prepared to pitch this season, and it's so far so good for him. They're really going to need him at the top. I mean, they really are going to need him to be a guy up there as a number 1, number 2, to really anchor the top of that rotation, to stay healthy through the season, to be someone they can count on for a ton of innings. And if he's pitching like he's pitching right now in the regular season, I think it's going to go just fine.
This brings us to the elephant in the room. Matt Manning had a rough day Saturday. Pretty much had a rough time every time he's gone out so far this spring. Velocity has been down. He's thrown for him an inordinate amount of breaking balls, which I'm not against, actually, if he wants to try to improve the quality of his breaking ball, because he needs to. But it is pretty concerning that his command's been poor, his velocity's down, and he's getting hammered. He likes to posture it as, I'm always 1 out away or 1 pitch away. And I've heard this from Matt many times. And here's what I want to share with you. You and I have talked about this before. Last year, Matt Manning was actually pretty damn good. And he was pretty damn good, depending on his fastball, well over 60% of the time. And one of our favorite fastball pitchers to watch is Joe Ryan on the Twins. And Baseball Savant has an interesting way of measuring pitch effectiveness. And, Joe Ryan's fastball is one of the 5 most effective fastballs in Major League Baseball, the way they grade it in performance. And if Matt Manning would have thrown as many innings as Joe Ryan last year, his fastball would have been even more effective than Joe Ryan. So in the pantheon of starting pitchers, if Matt Manning would have thrown about 140, 150 innings last year, it would have been a top 5 fastball for effectiveness in Major League Baseball. His fastball so far this spring is, they need to send out a search party for it. He's been throwing 90, 91. He dropped in a couple more, 93, 94 last year. I mean, 3 years ago, Matt Manning was throwing 100 in spring training. So I'm not so concerned about him throwing 100. I would like to see him throw 94, 95. I would like to see him throw it with the command he had last year. And then if he can add these breaking balls that he's been working so hard on, you might really have something. My biggest issue with Matt Manning is it's always something. It's always some nagging injury. It's always a command issue. It's an issue where he can't get more than 12 outs and he starts falling apart after 65 pitches. It's just one concern after another. It's like putting your finger in the dike because there's always something breaking. And to be really honest with you, after watching A.J. Hinch for 3 years, A.J. Hinch has patience, but he only has so much patience. And part of being a good contributing player is being able to be consistent and being able to show up and be able to be relied on. So if I was Matt Manning, I would show a little more in my next start than I've showed so far, because they have a very interesting, competent starting pitcher at number 6 right now in Joey Wentz. And it would not shock me if Matt Manning does not show more, that he starts his season at Toledo and Joey Wentz is the 5th starter. Thoughts?
I think we really need to see something from Matt Manning the next time he goes out and pitches. It's a problem. It's time. You're right. It's time. I mean, this is a former first-round pick who is supposed to be was supposed to be an anchor of the rebuild initially, right? It was Mize, Manning, Skubal, and there was all that hype. And Faedo was in that mix too before he got hurt. And it's where's Matt Manning? Where is Matt Manning? He's talked about, not being developed correctly and all those kind of things. But like, just go out there and pitch. Like it's time we see something, and it's time we see him put it together and maintain it. Like I want to see him do what guys like Matthew Boyd is doing and Spencer Turnbull is doing and Eduardo Rodriguez is doing right now. Like these are all guys that are doing exactly what they need to be doing, and they look really sharp. And you're supposed to look sharp in spring training when you're a good big league pitcher and you're ahead of hitters and you're doing your job. And Matt's fastball is sitting 91. Like that's not going to play like it did last year. You talk about the effectiveness of it. If that fastball is sitting 91, he's toast. He's absolutely toast. He had his best outings last year when he had the fastball working, when he was able to command that pitch and place it anywhere he wanted, and then also had the slider going. And that was basically it for him. He's kind of like and I've talked to you about this. I've talked to other beat writers who cover the team about this. He's a 1.5 pitch pitcher with a fastball that's really good when it's 93, 94, 95, and a slider that when it's on, it can be effective and it plays off the fastball really well. But he's talked about too, but it's again, it's where's the changeup? Like, let's see the curveball, break it out. And then we go to Saturday's start and he gets to 2 outs and walks back-to-back batters, and then, he gives up a home run to Ozzie Albies, and it's missed on a curveball. He was supposed to go up with it, left it down in the hot zone, and gone. So he's not executing his pitches. He's not mixing his pitches. He's not sequencing very well. It's kind of all signs are pointing to bad right now with Matt Manning. And it's a concern. You should be frustrated if you're a Tigers fan. It's about time for this guy to start showing it. And you would think that there'd be no better opportunity to do that than in spring training. And I get it. He had an injury last year and he didn't start throwing until, I think, January, this offseason. But that's fairly normal. I think he had enough of a ramp to really get going. And I'm saying it, you're saying it, AJ Hinch is saying it. Like, we're at the point now in spring training where you want to start seeing something, and he's not showing it yet. He's not showing it.
Yeah, I think I've talked myself out on Matt Manning. I'm going to talk about Joey Wentz, but first, I want to take a fast break. We'll be back. All right, I'm a pretty big Joey Wentz fan based upon how he looked in September. Has not been as sharp so far in his few outings this spring, but nonetheless, pretty good, especially good the last 2 innings after he gave up a home run in his most recent outing. I think he had like 6 or 7 whiffs with his cutter. I'm a pretty big Wentz fan, and I think he's breathing right down the neck of Matt Manning, and they would feel very comfortable inserting him as the 5th starter if Matt doesn't obviously improve his game here a little bit.
Big Joey Wentz guy, you kind of have to be after what he did in September last year and then going to the fall league and just absolutely dominating there. He looked so good. He overmatched everybody, which is why I wonder, is this guy really supposed to be in Toledo? And how long is he supposed to be in Toledo for? Because if he's dominating the fall league, where you have a lot of those prospects that are that's a lot of AA and kind of fringe AAA type guys, he made it look really easy. And I know he was coming off of a lot of momentum, but look, if Matt Manning gets it together and figures his crap out, I think he's going to end up being in the starting rotation in the big leagues. And it doesn't sound like they're going to go with the 6th man. So it sounds like Wentz would probably be the number 1 in Toledo, just waiting on an injury, trying to polish up as much as he can before he gets that next opportunity. But if Manning falters, you have a great replacement option in Wentz, somebody that you can feel confident in, and also somebody that you feel like you can develop at that level because he's ready for that level. He's ready to develop at that point. And so I think as long as everything is sharp, it's kind of a no-brainer to slide him right in there if Manning does need a little trip down the highway there to Toledo. But for now, I think Joey Wentz is your number 1 in Toledo. And he's waiting on his moment, waiting on his opportunity. The cutter's real. It plays. Really wanted to incorporate his curveball more into his arsenal. That's a pitch that he actually threw more in the fall league just kind of by happenstance and really enjoyed it. And the Tigers seem to think it plays well, so they want to see that a little bit more from him. But the cutter is that bread and butter. And when he has that pitch working, he's really tough to hit.
I think Joey Wentz will throw a lot of innings for the Tigers this year. Where he starts, don't know. But if I was Matt Manning, like I said, I'd start throwing quite a bit better than I've started my spring. All right, let's transition into the bullpen. The bullpen is in the state of flux. You've lost Joe Jimenez, Andrew Chafin, Gregory Soto, Michael Fulmer, who are basically those four guys were the back end of their bullpen last year, all gone. It's time to transition to some new faces. You still have Cisnero, you still have Foley, you still have Alex Lang, who on Sunday was Alex Lang, which is most of the time Alex Lang is very dominant, and then he will have an outing where he can't throw a strike and maybe gives up a dong, and it looks pretty ugly. Happened today, faced 4 hitters, was out of there. But somebody's going to have to be the closer. I think you and I favor the idea of having Cisnero as the closer and Lang as the leverage reliever. But, what are you seeing from the bullpen? It's still a work in progress. I got a lot of arms down there. Give me some of your perspective of what you think's happening.
Yeah, there are too many names. There are just too many names at this point. I mean, there's a lot of guys in the mix, and a lot of pitchers who could end up making this team, and a lot of pitchers who could end up, being sent out to Toledo, obviously. And that's going to have to happen here as we move along in spring training. I think, those kind of roster cuts also kind of send a message to the guys that are still there. Hey, pressure's on, it's heating up, it's happening. So we're going to start to get into that as we continue on. From what I've seen so far, Alex Lang seems hit or miss still. Jason Foley, I like his stuff. I think if he's able to bring a slider to the table that really plays, I think it makes that turbo sinker that much better. I think he's such a fascinating pitcher, and is going to be really good for the Tigers. Jose Cisnero, we kind of know what he can do. Will Vest is an interesting name. Hopefully he can replicate what he was able to do last year. I don't think he's a high leverage reliever, but I do think he has, middle inning type potential, someone that you could bring in when you really need it out in the 4th inning or in the 5th inning in a situation like that.
You think Vest is a lock? I mean, he threw in 60 games last year.
I'm not so sure, but I think he might be, but I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure about that. I think there are other arms in the bullpen that could push him out, but I think it would be a front runner right now, most certainly.
So there's 4 arms right there. Now you got, for left-hander, everybody seems to think Tyler Alexander's a lock. I'm not necessarily, from what I've seen of him, I don't think Tyler Alexander's a lock to come north. I think if he's not going to throw over 90 and doesn't really have anything that looks too sharp, and obviously Chasen Shreve is a pretty long-term veteran of Major League Baseball, has had some very solid years as a situational left-hander, and he's looked extremely good. So I would almost tell you that Shreve is a lock to make the staff right now.
I think so too. I think Shreve is definitely going to be in the bullpen if I had to predict it right now today. Don't forget about Mason Englert either. He's going to have to be in there as well as a Rule 5 guy that they're going to have to carry all season long on the 26-man active roster. Otherwise, they got to send him back to the Texas Rangers, or at least offer him back. I'm sure they would take him because he's looked pretty dynamic.
Let's talk about Mason Englert just for a second so people know where he came from and what his stuff is. Drafted, I think, from the Texas org, right? So was a starting pitcher up in the Double-A last year. Interesting guy. Pretty average major league fastball, 92 to 95. Decent slider, but a real dynamic changeup, real dynamic, and a lot of swag. Kind of a swaggy guy. I like guys that can throw strikes and have a good changeup. They typically they have a little attitude out there because they feel pretty good about tricking hitters and throwing strikes. Englert has looked damn good so far. Yeah,
I think you got to go to freep.com and check out Jeff Seidel's latest on Mason Englert. Talked a lot about how he climbed out of a lot of depression in his life and things that he dealt with away from the field that actually kind of crept onto the field and really caused him to struggle. There were, deaths in the family and panic attacks that he went through. And obviously that's a tougher subject to talk about than, just the baseball numbers and the changeup and things like that. But Jeff wrote a fantastic piece. Definitely worth going and checking out on freep.com just to know a little bit more about who this guy is. Because as he's grown through that, he's really good. He's really good. I think he's going to be a special pitcher. He's going to be pitching out of the bullpen this season. But, obviously you hold on to a guy and then you can do whatever you want with him as a Rule 5 after you keep him for a year. So I could see him with starter potential in the future. Somebody that just has a lot of different stuff and he has a way about him where he's confident. He's entered into games so far this spring where he's had his back against the wall. There's been runners on, and he's come in the game, and he's handled it handled it perfectly. He's handled it like somebody who's been there, done that before at the highest level. And so I really like him. I think he's going to be a good piece. And I think Tigers fans are going to enjoy both getting to know him and watching him this season.
All right, so now we're up to 6 that seem pretty set for the staff, not including Tyler Alexander. You also have the Holton kid they picked up from Arizona, who's thrown pretty well in his couple of outings. You got Miguel Diaz, who we saw in September last year, pretty much a fastball changeup guy. Pretty solid, though. Had some success in the major leagues. And Sunday, Trey Windjeter threw super dynamic arm they picked up from San Diego, been hurt for the last 3 years. 96, 98, and a wipeout slider. Been beset by injuries now for almost 3 seasons, but looks healthy right now and is proved literally in every outing. Struck out the side in his inning today. Really good slider. Not sure he's going to start the season in Detroit, but he would probably maybe be the first call-up they have from Toledo if he doesn't make the team. And I think relievers, people forget, but, relievers are going to be a revolving door. You're going to see 2-3 relievers in the first 45 to 60 days of the season. So they don't make the team straight out of spring training. There's going to be 2, 3, 4 guys that are going to be coming up before May 15th. And guys like Diaz and Holton and Windjeter, they're all going to get their shot the way they're throwing. They're throwing pretty well.
Yeah, I agree.
So their bullpen is obviously nothing like it's been the past few years, but it seemed like Harris has done a pretty decent job of assembling some interesting arms. It'll probably take them 4 to 6 weeks during the season to try and define roles a little bit. You got any idea who's going to be the closer?
No idea. I think they've done a good job of getting enough arms in there where pitching coach Chris Federer will be able to work his magic and probably will be closer by committee until someone really stands out.
So the first week, next week, I think we'll start seeing some definition in the bullpen. The season starts on the 30th of March, and we're getting to that time where they'll get a little more serious. All right, we need to take a break. We'll be back. All right, I want to talk a few minutes about the most fun part of spring training that we've seen before, and that would be Parker Meadows. So a lot of people think he's making the team out of spring training. I think we need to discuss that. I think it's probably unlikely unless he hits about another 2 or 3 homers. But he's been a lot of fun so far, huh?
Yeah, Parker Meadows has been a blast. So is Andre Lipschitz. I don't think either of them are going to make the team, just considering the fact that there's a few things that they want each of them to work on and each of them to accomplish. Look, I think one way of looking at this is Parker Meadows, entering Monday, is hitting .321 with 4 homers, 2 walks, 10 strikeouts. What if he went 0-4 in his next 10 at-bats? He'd be hitting .237. Would be feeling the same way? I don't think so. So that just kind of puts the numbers into perspective. Andre Lipschitz, will kind of combine them because I think they're both 2 standout guys who were just added to the 40-man. He's hitting .276 with 4 homers, 0 walks, 3 strikeouts. I think the fact that he's only struck out 3 times is really impressive. But what if he went 0-4 in his next 10 at-bats? He'd be hitting .205. We probably wouldn't be as excited about him.
The irony of both those guys is they both walked a ton last season, and they have not really walked a lot this spring training. So the idea that they haven't walked a lot, I don't necessarily think is a huge negative. When you look at the back of the baseball card, numbers for both of them, Lipschitz walks a ton. So I'm actually not too concerned that they haven't walked. But what I don't think people understand is that the caliber of pitching you're seeing now is not quite the caliber of pitching you're going to see in a major league game. Although Saturday, when Meadows went off, he did face some pretty quality major league pitching. He actually faced a left-hander and had a base hit. So those are all good signs. But I think for Parker Meadows, there's a lot of moving parts going on here. He's going to, if he were to make the team, he's going to play center field. It pushes Green to left, which is not necessarily a bad thing long term. But
I don't think he's making the team, so I don't really think that it matters at this point, right? I mean, he's definitely opened eyes. Like, look, this is important. What Parker Meadows is doing is so important for this organization moving forward because you got a taste of it last year. what he was able to do against fastballs last year, the production on contact improved significantly. His contact rate against fastballs increased by 8 percentage points. His chase rate against fastballs decreased by 10 percentage points. I mean, this is a guy that went from not being able to hit a fastball and not being on time for a fastball to being able to barrel up fastballs because of some swing changes that he made. And now we're seeing him do it in big league spring training against arms that he has watched on TV in the big leagues, for a long time. And that's really encouraging. We got to see him do it more often. Like I said, if he was over in his next 10 at-bats, he'd be hitting 237. We probably wouldn't be as excited about him. So just keep that in perspective because of the sample size. But yeah, I like Parker Meadows. I like what he's doing. Andre Lipsius is kind of a different story. He played in AAA last year, unlike Parker. But, he needs to work on his defense. Like, that's the thing that the Tigers are hammering home right now is he plays third base. He's played some second base. He can do some things in the infield, but they really want him to play first base. First base is the key. Developing at that position is what's going to get him to the next level so they could have some versatility. It kind of funnels into what I was saying about Ibanez and Nevin. The Tigers brought in these two guys who play primarily third base, but also can play first base. And they need someone who can also play first base. It's not just going to be Spencer Torkelson. What if they need a pinch runner for Torkelson? What if Torkelson needs a day off? And I don't think they plan on Scope being that guy that slides over and playing first. So now they need somebody who can play both of those corners. It's why we saw Nevin and Ibanez. And look, not to get too deep into what's happening with the roster, but if Cesar Hernandez is going to make the team and he's going to be primarily kind of a second baseman in tandem with Scope and more of a true utility guy, that gets me down to two players to play on that other part of the platoon with Nick Maton at third base. That's Ibanez and Lipsius. And if Lipsius is starting in Toledo, is Ibanez not your guy? Possibly. Again, we still have a ways to go, but they really want to see Lipsius improve at first base. So far, the defense there has been pretty bad. It's been pretty rough. And so that's going to have to develop if he's going to be on the big league team and on the roster. And that's not going to happen out of camp, I don't think. Now, and again, things can change if he continues to tear it up. And, even then, I just don't see it happening. I just don't see it happening with either of those guys. But it doesn't mean that what they're doing isn't important. That's the thing. Well, it doesn't mean that what they're doing isn't important.
I think this week will be very interesting. You have Jonathan Scope will be back in camp tomorrow. He's going to likely play a ton this week. But I would not be shocked if Lipsius started playing some second base too, because a simple solution to that problem, we know Scope can play first. He's not great there, but he's okay. He's had a lot more time.
But Mark, I don't think that helps you long term. Because Jonathan Scope is going to be gone. If he's not hitting, he's going to be gone possibly a couple months into the season, if not at the deadline or if not at the end of the season, if you really have to hold on to him. But at that point, you're going to cut bait. Like, he's not the future. Why would you waste first base reps on him when you could have other guys who could be here longer term playing that position and getting more comfortable when needed outside first? Now, look, in an injury situation, if you need to slide him over, fine. I don't think Jonathan Scope is going to start at first base.
Well, the only reason I bring this up is if they need somebody to play first base, Scope can play there. Lipsius has played second base before, and he's probably a better second baseman than he is a first baseman.
I agree, but he doesn't develop in that way. Then there's no defensive development because he can already do that.
I get it, but I don't know how much defensive development he's going to have once the season starts anyways. And probably by the time they figure out if they want to keep Scope or not in 2023, Tyler Nevin might be ready to play coming up from Toledo, and Andre Lipsius will go back down to Toledo, and they're obviously free to play him wherever they need to down there outside of everybody's watchful eye. So I'm not too concerned if he plays first or not. I do get the feeling there's a pretty good chance he's more than in the mix to come north to play as a utility player, at least for as long as, Andy Ibanez and Tyler Nevin are not healthy enough to take the job from him. So I'm not as worried about it as you are. But I think your point is well taken long term. I just don't think they're going to be that concerned if you can't play first base.
No, I think my point is just more to the fact that, for him to make the opening day roster, they would like for him to be, at least a serviceable first baseman. And right now, that's just not what he is. So that's what he's going to work on in Toledo. That's what he's going to go down there and work on if he does end up going down there. But yeah, I think he's going to be going to Toledo with Parker Meadows, and we'll see what they do, because those are two guys that have obviously shown that they can hit. But can you sustain it? Can you do it for a long period of time? we'll see. Time will tell on that. I think also it'll be interesting to see when all these guys come back from the WBC. You got Javier Baez playing for Team Puerto Rico. You got Miguel Cabrera playing for Team Venezuela. Those guys are obviously locked in. How is Jonathan Scope going to look coming back from playing for Team Netherlands? They got knocked out of the WBC on Sunday, and so he's going to come back into camp, and he's got to turn it up. He's got to turn it up. It's been a frustrating, really long stretch for him. He struggled last season, the entire year. He was literally the worst qualified hitter in baseball last year, and he went to the Caribbean Series to play for Curacao before spring training, struggled there, didn't hit well at all, went to the WBC, he struggled there too. So this is just like a really long period of struggling. Like we're almost coming up on a year of Jonathan Scope just being a bad hitter. It's time for that to change. Andy Ibanez is going to come back from Team Cuba at some point. Like I said before, they've moved on to the next round. Jack O'Loughlin, let's not forget about him, pitching for Team Australia. He's a minor leaguer, pitched in a pretty cool upset they had over Korea this week. And I got a chance to talk to him. That was pretty neat. But all eyes are going to be on Ibanez and Scope coming back from the WBC. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, Scope's going to have to turn it up. I think he was 1 for 13 for Curacao. And it's, you and I have had many debates and discussions. We think the probability is very low they would cut him before the season started, but he's got a very, very short window of time to start being more productive. And, I just don't think that AJ Hinch is going to be too happy if Jonathan Scope is not hitting.
Well, I don't think Scott Harris is going to be very happy either. And I think, that probably sends a message that you don't want to send to your team, cutting him before opening day. Also, you'd be eating $7.5 million, which I don't think is wise to do in any circumstance, especially with it being a one-year deal. Like that's kind of what it boils down to me. But also, I don't think it sends a great message through the clubhouse if you're going to cut Jonathan Scope before spring. I think it probably rub a lot of people the wrong way. Now, granted, on the flip side of that, maybe it does send a message of like, you better hit and you better control the zone, otherwise you're toast. But I think that probably wouldn't be great for a team that doesn't have postseason aspirations in the way that they've spoken about their goals. They've talked about just competing for as long as they can. They haven't said we want to compete for the playoffs or compete for a World Series or this is our year or anything like that. If that were the case and there were an immediate replacement, maybe it makes a little bit of sense. But you really don't have anybody. You're also really not trying to go out there and win in terms of making these crazy declarations that you're going to go all the way this year. So I don't think there's a problem with leaving him on the roster, seeing what he can do, but he's going to be sitting on the bench a lot this season if he doesn't start hitting. And that's why they got Cesar Hernandez. He's played great defensively. He's hit a ton of doubles so far in spring, and he looks pretty good.
I don't think Jonathan Scope's going to sit on the bench. He's either going to play or get cut. So it's pretty do or die for him. I don't think we're breaking news here on this, but he's got a short window, needs to start hitting, and period, end of story. So Ev, we've covered a lot of ground today. Spring training can get pretty long. Tigers had a good week. I'd like to thank our executive producer, sports editor Kirk Crawford, our other executive producer, interim editor of the Detroit Free Press, Anjanette Delgado, our producer, Robin Chan, my grandson, Braden Michael Gorosh, Evan's fiance, Savannah, my pizza guy at Primo's, Mike, and my buddy, the Podfather. So for Evan Petzold, we'll see you next week. Peace.